Awesome, that's up. Ailey, you're going to share and time stuff? Or you want me to do that?
I'm happy to do it. If you could clap the times, that would be great. I do sometimes forget. One note before we begin is that because for whatever unknown to us all reason they decided to build these rooms with two glass walls, the noise in here is really bouncy. So if you could just be a little bit extra aware that it does resonate more than you would expect for a room this size. Okay. With all that out of the way, we've had a couple. You may tell that I've had that issue already. With all that out of the way, I'd like to welcome the first speaker up to the floor to open the debate.
In Northland, we're only seeing around 70% of level 1 NCEA students passing, whereas if we move further down the country, we're seeing kids in Auckland, there's a around 80 to 90% success pass rate. That is showing us that there is a problem with the curriculum because it cannot be universally spread throughout the nation, supporting each school in their own individual uniqueness. So 3 main points for you in today's debate. Firstly, how this increases passion for teachers. Secondly, better opportunities for the students. And thirdly, how this will encourage ingenuity from the students. For some setup, there's 2 main groups in today's debate. Firstly, the teachers. Teachers don't typically fully agree with the curriculum that is provided by them because it's irrelevant to what's currently happening on. It doesn't actually apply to things that is happening in the world today, and kids just don't like to listen to these things. We're seeing it being a repetitive thing. This means that they aren't as passionate about what they're teaching. If teachers are strict to curriculum teachers are strict to the curriculum, students will be doing well. This doesn't allow for teachers to have the room to adapt and teach new things because they won't see as much success in their classrooms. They also aren't as passionate teachers. They're not connected to the content anymore, and it's making it less appealing for students. The second group in today's debate is the students. The high achievers don't feel like they can go into the depth that they want to. They can't succeed beyond the limits that this current curriculum places us under. Secondly, it's because curriculum is generalised. It doesn't cater to minorities. Minorities aren't the ones setting it, and it's not catered to the minority, it's catered to the majority. Minorities lose out on this valuable education that they've already lost enough of due to things like colonisation. Now, in today's model, we have both government and schools obviously want to succeed to provide kids to provide a good future for Aotearoa. This means they're likely to ensure that kids meet the basic understanding and knowledge to go to university, like, for example, having specific markings for numeracy and literacy. Teachers will work together in this case, likely to do this because they already have a high workload and will need to work together to do this. And this means there's a curriculum that caters to their whole community, and other schools could also use it because they have more of a say and they're likely to be further engaged and enjoy doing this as well. That's another reason why teachers will be willing to actually make this curriculum. If school standards are dropping, the government will obviously step in and help support the school to bring it back up to level. And also the information that is being spread to these students is likely to be cross-examined, and it is also too easy to get away with just spreading misinformation as a teacher because students can obviously Google things and search things up. We need to point it out that it only takes one good teacher to make a great curriculum that the community can adapt to. Now, moving on to my first point about how this will increase the passion for teachers. For some context, teachers have limited amount of sway in what they teach and how they teach it. If they believe there is a better way to do it, they can't because the curriculum doesn't allow them. We'll also point out that teachers are really disengaged currently with their job because of things like their pay rates and the teacher strikes. It's showing that they're not as engaged and not as passionate. So firstly, teachers will overall feel more engaged. If they have more control over what they're teaching, they'll have more passion because they actually enjoy the topic that they're teaching their students about. Currently, teachers under status quo are disengaged because they've taught the same thing for 10 years. They're bored of it. They're simply not going to be able to add that passion and that fire to engage the students, which makes you you're not forming as well as a teacher as you should. If they want to talk, for example, if they want to talk about things like Indigenous people, Indigenous communities, they can't because it's not set in the curriculum. Secondly, teachers are teaching outdated things. It takes so long to change assessments and syllabuses because of the fact that it's controlled by the government. They can't adapt to current issues and important things to focus on For example, more focus on the political climate, considering that students are a lot more engaged in the political climate than ever. They can't adapt to this because it just takes too long. Teachers and students cannot relate. Thirdly, teachers have good experience to advocate for better learning opportunities. They've been through secondary school, they've gone through tertiary education, they know what's useful, and they know what students should be being taught. They can include this knowledge into their curriculum, which will further develop students easier for tertiary educations. Lastly, upcoming teachers are more inclined to continue teaching, especially people that are considering going into teaching. When teachers realise that they have the control and power to decide what they want to teach students, they are going to feel more empowered and more respected as a teacher. This means that we're going to see an increasement in employment of teachers, which is something that New Zealand needs to focus on. The outcomes of this is that ultimately teachers will engage more with their work, their kids, because of their personal passion towards the topics that they're teaching. This leads to kids having better teachers. They're obviously given the support that they need to thrive in the school system, and teachers will like their job, meaning they will stay working. Before I move on, I'll take a point. Why do people fail under the status quo? Because we're not given the wide range of information, the wide range of opportunities to everyone. As I said in my introduction, we're seeing a disproportionate amount of people failing, and they're under the same curriculum, but in different areas. How is that seem fair? Now, moving on to my second point about better opportunity for students. For some context, teachers are aware of the demographic they teach. They want to cater to them because they benefit from students doing well. Because they care. Also, they care about the youth, and because they clearly took the job, despite it not being paid that well, they care enough to take this job. And secondly, because if they're teaching lower decile schools, it shows they have personal aims to support and uplift the students there. Otherwise, if it was more about a money thing or a career choice, they would decide to go somewhere else. So, firstly, they'll be able to culturally apply to students, so the students will connect to it more. Because students generally have some kind of connection to their culture, they're likely to engage when taught. They're likely to engage when they're taught it in classes. For example, learning about Māori values on sustainability. This will increase engagement for Māori students that can relate to this and can also learn more about their culture. Secondly, it's more up to date, it's fresh and modern. As I was saying before, we can't see the updates be as frequent. Since teachers have more of a control, they can update it when it feels like what they're teaching is not relevant or significant anymore. Thirdly, minorities often don't have faith in the government making this curriculum. This is because they have an aversion to institutions because of past wrongdoings like colonisation and being treated disrespectfully. This leads to students living in the minorities not listening. If teachers are shifting the curriculum, students can trust that teachers are actually trying to support them, and they can trust that the teachers have their best interests at heart, not just some rich white man on the Ministry of Education who doesn't know them at all. Fourthly, it's easier to understand concepts if it's actually related to you. You can find a connection there, increasing interest in the topic and also knowledge of the topic. For example, learning about the history of the community that you live in. Lastly, we are able to encourage creativity and motivate students who otherwise struggle with having their knowledge limited by a strict curriculum. My second speaker will go further into depth on this. The outcomes of this is that students are way more engaged because they enjoy what they're being taught. They're being catered to directly from their teachers. They could have some kind of say in what they're being taught. This means we're going to see them learning easier. Being engaged with the subject means they can focus more. They'll listen. You'll see an improved learning, improved education rates. People will be passing more, enjoying school more. Less students will be dropping out of classes, which is something that we see significantly, especially in Northland. We're going to see a higher engagement rate for students, therefore a better education system. Thank you.
Kia ora, we are listening to the speech, and now we'll move on to speaking for the opposition.
access to education is still a privilege to many countries in a developing world. The affirmative team wants to uproot their systems in order to perpetrate wealth inequality for the lucky few who are able to excel. Team Hawkes Bay tells you that we get better schooling and we ensure success for all of our students. 3 points on this today. Firstly, on equal opportunities in schools. Secondly, on how it affects us later in life. And thirdly, Isabella will provide a split into the teachers. Before I continue, 3 main points of setup. Firstly, what is the status quo? It's standardised curriculums and standards set by the government, set by the Ministry of Education, who I'd just like to add in now is not the characterisation of rich white men. It looks like ex-teachers, people who care about education. That characterisation is completely false. But I'd also like to note that these standards are constantly revised. We saw this with learning recognition credits being introduced in NCEA after COVID. These aren't these unchangeable things like the affirmative team proposed. Secondly, we will enhance this current status quo following education systems like in Scandinavian countries like Sweden, like with less standardised testings, more student support, but still maintaining national accreditations. Thirdly, other accreditations can still exist like we see in the status quo. This looks like Steiner schools having a Steiner certificate. They are a minority, but they do exist. But we say that we have national credentials that are widely recognised in this and are probably more important. Before I continue, on to a bit of rebuttal. Now, the main push from the affirmative team revolves around the teachers and not the students. On their teachers' point anyway, the idea that teachers are going to be super stoked about creating a curriculum from scratch is unrealistic. They talk about the teachers' strikes, about them not having enough resources in their classroom. Imagine now if we put the extra load of them of creating an entirely new curriculum. This isn't going to make teachers as happy. This is going to make them more angry, especially when we already see that the government can't find any money to pay them in the first place. Secondly, the idea of big, important ideas not being set in the curriculum. Now, we can see it in the NCEA standards, and we can see it reflected in other standards in America, in the UK, and GCSEs. Teachers can choose what they teach. It's just the standard. It's just the essay format that they're writing in. Stuff like that. The idea that you cannot choose what you're teaching students is stupid. It's not true. We see that teachers can choose whether they want to teach Te Tiriti o Waitangi. They can choose whether they want to teach the Springbok tour. They just have formats which can be moderated, and we'll go on to talk about why that's important in the future. Also, the idea that teachers benefit from students doing well goes on to prove what I'll talk about later, how it just means teachers will have more of an incentive to prioritise the smarter students and neglect people struggling. And I will now move on to my first point about equal opportunities in schools. We do not want to divide social issues even further. 3 reasons why this is less likely to happen under our side of the house. Firstly, with private schools. Private schools have structural differences. This means they have vastly more resources and can provide loads more classes and niche subjects areas like art history that public schools just don't have as much of. When there's a standard in place, no matter what the school teaches, students come out with the same qualification. On their side of the house, students coming out of public schools with Achievement Maths 101 will not be able to compete with private school students coming out with a long list of accreditations for all their niche subjects. This is going to further divide between the socioeconomic groups because we see poorer people just not having the same education because it isn't a general standard that people understand. Secondly, on different values. Today, kids in Christian schools have to learn about science. They have to learn about different ideas. We see that without set standards, schools can filter and moderate teaching better. This leads to children being less educated on important issues like sex education. If the teachers decide that it's not fit to teach because it doesn't fit with their values. We can see this with madrasas being funded by Saudi Arabia. They have incentives to teach things that aren't getting them a full-rounded education. Thirdly, on accessibilities of resources. Under status quo, we see well-established systems across the world. This looks like resources from 2012 being available, past papers, videos. This helps students that aren't the ones that are only learning from looking at their teachers and getting it talked to them like we're going to have in this new curriculum that's completely new. They can look to other resources. That means we get a better education system for a load of different students, and it's not just the one pathway. We can see that this is important. And fourthly, on the ability to moderate. Under the status quo, in most education systems like GCSEs, they have to be moderated, so teachers have to double check that everything's being fair. When we see no standard curriculum and teachers like not only marking their own works or a few teachers working together like they put in their model, we see that this still isn't fair. A few teachers working together in the same school is not going to create unbiased marking like we can see in standardised testing. This is especially prevalent in competitive societies where kids are going to do anything to get a good grade, but we also see that it's super unfair for kids in rural schools who have one teacher who's been teaching there traditionally for like years and has a very set very narrow mindset. And because they might dislike a student, they're not going to give them a fair chance. What we see is small schools getting left behind, and we increase the gap between the educated and uneducated in our society. We see students feeling like the education does not matter. They're more likely to drop out. Thirdly, we see schools shutting down. They don't have the resources to compete with other curriculums. And like in already shaky education systems like in Sudan, it's hard enough to develop a school, let alone when you have to literally start from scratch with your curriculum. This is extremely important as we see education is needed in these areas. I will take a POI now.
Given that teaching the same content for 10 years on end is often disengaging and boring for the teacher and the student, how do you expect teachers to still teach it in a fun and engaging way?
I suggest that they change the topic that they're teaching. Under the same standard, I would personally switch my topic into a more interesting one. Alright, now on to my next point about life after school. The main objective of school systems is to set you up for the real world. 3 reasons why we do this better. Firstly, qualifications lose value under their side of the house. Employers don't understand the value of every single accreditation that every individual school wants to create. This means the race to the bottom for schools is to create as many useless qualifications as they can so their students come out looking the best on their long list of CVs. This means students don't get a deep knowledge or applicable skills that can actually be put into the workplace. Instead, they get a wide range of skills that don't necessarily contribute to anything. With standardised systems, we can see that employees understand and can clearly see the relevance of the classes they take. This looks like electricians looking for NCEA level 2. It looks like other schools prioritising this. Secondly, is the people who are deciding this education, under the status quo, we have a separate government entity to decide what schools and students need. School boards, or like singular teachers, especially in rural areas, or like other people, they have their own bias, you know? We get, and they focus, all of them have their different biases and want to focus on different things. When we see this, people might choose, like I've already said, to skip over sex education, to skip over religious studies of wider things. This means we get an echo chamber of students just learning the same thing in their schools, not preparing them for what's actually going on in the wider world. This means that because teachers can choose, they don't understand. They have their one life pathway. They don't know what a student needs to become sparky if they've decided they wanted to be a teacher from the age of 3 because they're so passionate about it. They truly don't understand the range. Also on how we protect kids, we have programs like Gateway in place, preventing students from dropping out. We get kids understanding the base knowledge that's beneficial, not having kids in physics just because they can, but because it's going to improve technology in our society. We're going to get high skilled people, we're going to get higher paying workers. Education that's actually going to be helpful into getting any kids into any job. We also don't want to overcomplicate uni systems, having to look over just quickly on that. But at the end of the standard set of precedent for education, side with Team Hawkes Bay.
I'd like to speak to that speech, and now we're going to see the more.
Go first, second, action.
realistically, given the Ministry of Education doesn't want to have the perception of being associated with dozens of regional rural schools which are teaching racist rhetoric and pushing bigoted agendas, they are obviously going to have implementation and regulation in regards to ensuring that teachers do not get away with having biased viewpoints, and thus there's even more public pressure to ensure racist teachers don't get into those positions because now they have even more influence, and so there's more public pressure to ensure that those people don't have the sort of power and aren't able to sway our youth in the wrong direction. Why are teachers held accountable for biased viewpoints is the first thing that I'm going to be discussing. Secondly, on why teachers are just generally better than governments in deciding a syllabus. And finally, I'm going to speak about encouraging ingenuity and other benefits that we create. Why are teachers held accountable for biased viewpoints? Firstly, the government doesn't want massive backlash of allowing a racist public school to perpetuate bigotry. They are responsible for ensuring that the education syllabus has some sort of reasonable and is preparing students for the real world. Thus, they're not going to support the school. They're probably going to provide them less funding, but they're also just not going to let those teachers get into positions of power by which they can expel their racist rhetoric. They're probably also going to provide more sort of teacher training and facilitation for cultural significance and that kind of thing when they are training up new teachers. They're probably also going to have programs which teach teachers how to be more less bigoted and more accepting of minorities. They're not going to allow teachers to get away with biased content in reality. Secondly, it is simply the age of information. Students aren't going to automatically believe this rhetoric because A, they can just Google it, but secondly, I think there's probably a more increased societal awareness of bigotry. A lot of people are talking about it. They're probably going to be discussing this kind of things with their peers, and thirdly, they can just think logically, right? If your teacher is saying vaccines don't work, they're going to put microchips in you, I think the average person probably isn't going to believe that, regardless of whether you're 14 or 15 or 16, because realistically, they have the thinking skills to be able to process that kind of thing. They have alternate information, and thirdly, they don't have the same teacher every year or the same teacher for every subject. They're definitely hearing a lot of different viewpoints. These teachers supposedly teaching in rural schools forever probably just don't exist to the same extent that you think they do, because a lot of people tend to move around, right? Teachers are not going to be staying in the same school and the same area for years and years and years. They're probably hearing different viewpoints during their entire career and are likely to have quite a wholesome, a well-covered, diverse base of knowledge. I think the outcome of one teacher not telling you about sex ed is probably not as big of a deal, given that it can be researched by yourself or be told by other teachers. Realistically, this is not a major outcome when our alternative is saying that minority kids do not get taught in a way which is beneficial for them. Why do teachers do a better job than governments do? Teachers know these kids personally. They speak to them every day. They likely have quite a close connection to them. Teachers know the system personally. They understand what information is important, both because they went through it and because that is their entire career. They have probably been teaching the syllabus for quite a long time. A lot of teachers have been around for a long time. They've taught it in a lot of different circumstances, and so they're able to understand the system and the problems with implementation that they have been encouraging, but also able to assess whether students are engaging simply because they see it in front of them every day. If students really don't like what you're teaching, they're probably very rowdy, they probably don't listen to you, they probably don't like you very much, and you're able to see that kind of stuff and shift your syllabus to do that. Why are governments intrinsically worse? Also, to choose to go into teaching, especially in low-decile schools, which is not exactly the ideal environment, you must have a passion for the future of our youth, and thus you obviously have an incentive to ensure that they get the best information possible and that they have the best future possible. Why are governments intrinsically worse? Firstly, the curriculum introduced has to be majoritarian, because if it doesn't apply to the average white middle-class person, there will be public outrage and people will feel like it is not representative of them. If an Aucklander is saying, actually this curriculum is just made for Northland, I'm really annoyed about that, they're probably going to see more public pressure, which encourages them to cater to the majority. What this means is minorities do not get the same sort of access to specific education that they want to. Secondly, it was created by bureaucrats who have probably never experienced public school. I think it is untrue that the average teacher, the average Ministry of Education board member was an ex-teacher, because realistically, if you're becoming a teacher and you spend a significant amount of time in that career, you probably have a back foot upon the rest of the Ministry of Education who have been through a political degree, have probably had some sort of power in the past, have been a leader. They probably have an advantage over you, and they're likely to be the higher up people. But additionally, these bureaucrats probably don't actually see this kind of stuff. It takes a lot more effort to keep the syllabus up to date when it's being implemented nationally. Bureaucratic disagreements are quite slow. There's a lot of deliberations that come come into changing a syllabus, it's also incredibly costly, right? To change every single textbook to be like the most up to date, to just like get rid of old info, get rid of old resources. As you say, the resources that have been around since 2012 are still floating around today. That's really hard to like remove from the public perception. Thirdly, policymakers don't visually see this disengagement until the damage is already done. They do not see that students are struggling within school until they see those test marks, until they see that students do not understand and students are simply relying on memory to get by. They had at some point on like the extra load of creating an entirely new curriculum. Look, I think people are probably going to have more respect for teachers when they realise just how fundamental they are to the entire teaching system, given that having like good incentives to teachers ultimately means your students get more information, and you're probably going to see more funding and more support for the future in general. You also have a community of teachers who are able to work together. They probably like have quite a lot of community because they've been through the same struggles, and so are likely to work together on a syllabus. This will also be like slowly implemented. I think these teachers have probably spent a long time teaching, and they already know what sort of changes they want to see in the syllabus because they've been frustrated with it so long, and so they have an idea of what they want to see taught. They said that teachers can apparently choose. Look, I think the success of a teacher is identified by test marks. Teachers who deviate from the curriculum don't get as good marks because they're not focusing on memorization and purely just like rigorous syllabus stuff. They're focusing on like proper understanding, but that doesn't necessarily correlate to better marks. It's also just not true. Like in an IGCSE context, which you wanted to have, you must discuss like the exact same like literature. You must have an essay on a set of given like stuff. So it's just not true that that's the case. I'll just take a POI very quick before I move on.
So now that the ministry isn't doing curriculum, accreditations, anything like that, what does the ministry do?
Okay, awesome. So maybe the ministry is providing education for teachers as to what sort of stuff they would like to see within schools, what sort of like cultural stuff that they would like to see, and also just assessing like the health and well-being of students and probably making schools like a nicer place to be, like having like support for students while they're in school, probably also like encouraging tertiary education and stuff like that. Look, encouraging ingenuity is incredibly important in this day and age. Teachers are likely to put their own spin on it. You're probably getting a lot of more viewpoints, more ideas, more perspectives, and thus more knowledge. Secondly, it's probably not going to be as rushed, given you don't have to cover an entire set syllabus, which is likely to probably have a lot of content that you need to get through. You're able to fully engage with the content and ensure that it is fully understood. If you're rushing to get through a curriculum, you just can't do this. Thirdly, you're not rote learning as much. Teachers probably don't want to sit their kids down and bore them to death with facts that they must memorize. They focus on understanding the content now and getting those like hard skills which they're able to use later in life. Fourthly, it's new, it's fresh, it's up to date. They want fun classes for more student engagement, and also because it genuinely probably is interesting to teachers to talk about like AI and stuff like that. Ingenuity is so important, especially in a day and age where memorization doesn't actually matter. In a real world, jobs don't value what you memorized 10 years ago because you can just Google it. And age of automation means that creating a subservient workforce to feed into factories is no longer the priority, given that ingenuity is something that cannot be replaced by a machine. Creativity flourishes, you hear different viewpoints, you're more able to see progression in society and technology. Thank you.
Here, let's next speaker for that speech, and I'll move on to the speaker.
Switching and updating the curriculum constantly doesn't matter when we get huge failures to protect and help students in the things that matter most, getting a quality education. A few things that I'll be discussing in my rebuttal. Firstly, I'll just be touching on the characterisations that have been brought up in this debate and clarifying what is actually true. Then I'll move on to talking about like which side gets better quality of education. Secondly, I'll be talking about success. Thirdly, something that's gone critically unresponded to on further education. And then I'll be briefly talking about resources and responding to this split before moving on to my point about like the workload and the impact on teachers that worsens on their side of the house. Just to start off with, on the model and the characterisations, we heard from like the affirmative team that basically they characterise the board as being a bunch of white men. Our first speaker started by responding to this, but to further off of this, do we think that a Te Reo Māori curriculum is being set by a white man? No. We think that this is because there are a diverse range of people with a diverse range of qualifications. There are professors, there are people who have been involved in the field, who engage with the community. We have female professors, so obviously that point just doesn't stand in this debate. And it shows that we do actually have diversity in setting the curriculums that kids are being taught. And then secondly, they were talking about like how on our side of the house, on their side of the house, they're likely to have restrictions on schools that are likely to reduce like racism and things that could show up in teaching. A couple of responses to this. Firstly, we see that there are just so many teachers in schools that it's going to be hard to do this, and we don't even have a baseline to go off to decide what is like potentially harmful or potentially indoctrinating or just wrong general. Secondly, we tell you that we believe it and they also were saying that kids aren't going to just believe everything that they see. Well, let's take, for example, a madrasha, like we bring up at first, where your entire country is an Islamic state. You're likely to just believe that anyway. There are many examples of this, and it's not just New Zealand where you're unlikely to, are likely to just know about everything. And even in New Zealand, we could see, Catholic schools, religious schools, where your entirely family environment is about religion. So obviously that shows that these kids aren't just necessarily going to be able to understand and process and be critical thinkers of absolutely everything that their trusted teacher is telling them. So at the end of this point, we can see that basically the restrictions that they are suggesting they're going to have just aren't enough to combat the huge harms that we bring up at first. And then also, they also bring up that they're teachers are going to be working together, so the workload just doesn't really matter. Why isn't this true? Well, we think that working together, it just means that if they're planning to wanting to get lots of teachers putting forward the views that they're wanting and updating, they just don't get that on that side of the house, so they need to explain what they actually are standing for in this debate. Moving on to the first sort of question in this debate about the quality. So what they firstly told us is that they think that quality is extremely important in adapting the material. A couple of responses to this. Firstly, we think that which subjects are they actually going to be impacted by this changing the material to be more relevant. So are we talking history? History's focused on the past. Are we talking about maths? Maths barely ever changes. We don't even understand what examples there are that are actually going to be harming huge amounts of students. They don't exist. And then also they were telling us that these subjects, they need to be updated constantly because then it's been keeping up with the latest information, and basically that this does not happen because it's really hard to update. Why isn't this true? Well, firstly, we think that the government has way more resources in order to be able to update the material rather than just spreading this material across huge numbers of schools that they're going to be seeing on their side of the house. Secondly, we tell you that it's centralised. So the government has all of these extra advisors and stuff. It's centralised in one location. They make the decisions. They don't have the bureaucracy that you could potentially have with hundreds of schools. You get the decisions. You get someone who's making the final call. You don't get that on that side of the house. And then also they told us about the quality of the education is going to be impeded on because of engagement. And they told us that basically the topics remain the same, which is boring. And they gave the example firstly of students. We think that obviously this doesn't impact students because students aren't going to be taking the same level 1 maths course twice. It just doesn't make sense. Secondly, on teachers, as we explained at first, teachers can switch up the topic however they want. This looks like in English courses. The teacher can select whichever book they want, whatever movie they want. It can keep relevant and they can keep up to date with the themes that matter. So obviously at the end of this point, we're still getting engagement both from teachers and from students, so that just doesn't stand in this debate. And then before I move on to my next point, I'll take it.
If your entire country is in an Islamic state and bigotry is the norm, would this not be perpetuated within whichever curriculum is provided by the state?
Well, we think that the state is likely to be more like other countries are more likely to be able to hold that state to
criticize it and say like you're just indoctrinating your kids, which isn't going to happen when you just have like your individual little teachers and principals running around trying to decide everything.
Moving on to my next question on success. Basically, we could see what the affirmative team stands for in terms of success. When their first speaker told us that they're going to be getting high achieving students and continuing to do well, we don't really care about the high achieving students who are likely to succeed anyway because of the way that their brain works means that they tend to be able to have success no matter whatever happens. We care about the students who aren't succeeding. And how do we improve this for them? Well, these students can tend to be the ones in low decile areas because they don't have the access to resources. And basically they told us that these resources, it doesn't matter because the teachers, they're going to get teachers anyway. Teachers are likely to move around. But why isn't this? Well, firstly we tell you that the teachers are stuck here because it's expensive to move. It's likely that these low decile schools are in regions where it's actually it's easier to live there. There's a lower cost of living. And also it's likely that they grew up there. And so these teachers are just likely to remain there and not move around like they were claiming. And then furthermore on success, they basically also bring this back to engagement and how now you get to cater to every single student, gets personalised content somehow, and so every single student is just going to succeed. This isn't true. Why isn't this? Well, again, so many different students. A school with potentially 1,000+ students, and suddenly your teacher's just going to be expected to cater their material to every single student. This isn't possible. It's not going to happen. They don't get greater success. We get greater success when you have a standardised model that means that all students, as our first speaker explained, get an equal access to education, which is so important in this debate. And then firstly I'm just going to touch on the further education, which as I earlier said, goes critically under-responded to. So basically they told us that because teachers are going to be working together, it means that unis somehow are just going to be able to recognise everyone. There's less accreditations going around. As our first speaker already explained, you get so many accreditations because it's now that's all that matters. You don't even know which accreditations are important because there's so many of them. And this means it just makes it so much harder for universities to understand which ones they need to be trusting, and we don't get kids getting proper education and the ones who are meant to be. Moving on to my point about the workload and the impact of teachers. So basically it gets worse on their side of the house, even though they claim to support teachers. Firstly, it's because there's no government backup to actually help these teachers. There's no nationalised entity. There's no incentive for the government to help them anymore because the government is no longer setting a base standard for them. They don't even know what the teachers want to do. They're just going off and setting whichever curriculum they want. Secondly, we tell you that whole new curriculums require an immense amount of effort. Our really stretched teachers, as the affirming team understands, are going to have to be developing whole new systems, whole new curriculums after hours, which just means at the end of this, we get teachers just going away, leaving the profession. They're not going to enter into the profession in the first place. And then thirdly, we see that our side gets shared resources much more on their side of the house. We get teachers that are able to help each other because they have a shared baseline that they're all working off. We just don't get this on their side of the house. Ultimately, we don't get the teachers leaving, going away to other countries, not entering the profession in the first place. We get better education for the students that need it.
So I'd like to speak for their speech and welcome up to the
Look, Judge, the reason why 70% of Northland kids failed NCEA Level 1 isn't because we have bad teachers. It is because the curriculum is made to suit the white majority while forgetting about minorities, intricacies, and local community. 3 questions, 3 ways that we can win today's debate. Firstly, we prove that teachers become more engaged when they can choose their curriculum, thus teach the curriculum better. Secondly, that it increases innovation and relevance of the education. And thirdly, students become more engaged. No, I put teachers first, because if we have engaged teachers, they engage the students. That's a flow-on effect. Cool. Now for teachers, what have we heard from opposition down the bench? The first thing we heard that is status quo is a standardized curriculum, which ex-teachers, that it's constantly changing. We saw this with COVID requirements for credits. 4 responses here. First is just like, simply as they said, the curriculum is made up of old teachers, PhD students who aren't actively in the classrooms, who aren't actively talking to students, right? That is really harmful because it means they're not having constant engagement with students. They're not having hearing exactly what kids want to learn, right? And even if they do, they have to go through years of talking to other teachers and cross-referencing everything. So even in opposition's best case, and they do have some engagement, it takes about 5 years to get in place. By the time 5 years taken past, that's 5 years too late. So we get that today. The second response here, it's just it doesn't change a system. Often the curriculum won't change a system if it's not broken, right? Because under status quo, they get their NCEA credits, they get people passing. They don't want to change the system if it's already working under status quo. No, it's not working for minorities. We protect these minorities. Thirdly, it just costs a lot to change the resources, right? They've spent billions of dollars putting out NCEA level 1 for all the resources. They're not likely to be hey, I'm going to change this today and spend $5 billion more, right? They've got limited funding. They're likely just to stick to all the resources they've got. Fourthly, it's just due to structural issues. For example, white people, white men being able to get to university, getting PhDs. That means they're more likely to be on these board of trustees, right? That's a structural issue. Neither side can negate that. Therefore, the people who are likely to be on this is likely white men. That's really harmful because even if they want to share minorities, they talk to them. They can't understand the intricacies of that minority group because they're not from that background, right? Really harmful. This basically means that the curriculum right now isn't moving as fast as we like. Comparatively, we can change it tomorrow and we can adapt to ChatGPT, right? That's a really good example because teachers are don't use ChatGPT. Everyone uses ChatGPT. We can change it. We can change the curriculum. The second question we have from opposition is that teachers have to create a new curriculum. This is really, really hard. 3 responses. First, it's in the first few years, there's nothing saying that they can't use the resources and the curriculum they've already got, right? They can still stick to NCEA. It's there is such a big burden the opposition wants to claim. Secondly, it's just what actually happens is when you allow to choose the curriculum, it looks like teachers are working together, right? Nobody wants to have more work. Therefore, all it takes is one passionate teacher, right? Because if one passionate teacher goes out there, creates a really good history curriculum for Northland, every other teacher can adapt that, use that resources, right? It doesn't take every teacher working 15 billion hours. They can use the knowledge they've got. They know the knowledge. All they have to do is teach their kids. That's really crucial because they're engaged in that. They actually want to teach their kids. They see the significance of that. They represent that when they're teaching it to the kids. They're this is why you need to use it. This is why I'm teaching it to you. Comparatively, when it's standardized, they're oh yes, you should really learn about this. Why? Just so you can pass the exam. Really harmful. Teachers actually have purpose on our side. Thirdly, it's just there's more funding for government when you're having to create new things. Therefore, it looks giving people more money because they no longer have to fund the board of education as much. So they give teachers more money to do this extra work to transition to new curriculums. Note that this means in actual fact it's not hard because teachers share their resources, and even if it is hard, they get paid more. They can still use NCEA resources. The last claim that we heard about this is that teachers can choose what they want to teach. They can choose if they want to choose Tairawhiti under status quo. 2 responses. First, it's teachers actually, that's a false characterization of the status quo, right? Because teachers can't just go and choose this random thing in the Middle East, for example. They have to choose things that that they have to tick off a list, right? They can't just choose some radical thing. They have to get accepted from the NCEA and it has to fill the standards, right? It has to follow the guidelines that the government gives out. They can't choose some random thing and doesn't follow the curriculum. Second response here is just as opposition said, standards never change. Thus, even if the topic, even if you can change the topic, right? You still have to teach them. You have to repeal paragraph. You have to do this paragraph every single year. That still becomes boring, right? Because even if you're teaching new content, the thing you're teaching is the way you're teaching it is still the same. That's still really disengaging. At the end of this, we've shown you that teachers can create the new curriculum quite easily. They become more engaged, right? Most teachers will become more engaged. That's really crucial because they teach their kids better. Kids get better education. I'll quickly take a PY before I move on.
What do you need to look for in students?
Perfect. This is a nice segue to my next point. Increase innovation. Cool. I'll quickly start with the response there. So they told us that employees don't know how to use qualifications when it's everyone gets qualifications. 4 main responses. First, just under status quo, often employees don't mind if don't really care if you've got NCEA level 1, right? A Sparky's not going to be oh, you passed level 1 maths, we really care about that. All they really care about is if you have the skills, we show them that they get the skills. Secondly, just now under our side of the house, employees now look to who is actually best fit for that job, right? Because often they're instead of looking for NCEA level 1, they look for who is actually a good fit for this employer. Secondly, just often NCEA focuses on a white majority and minorities disadvantaged, right? That's what we see in Northland. 70% of kids failed. A disproportionate amount was Maori students, right? Therefore, the people who are actually passing level 1, passing level 2 are white majorities. They get into these jobs because they've got the advantage. Comparatively, we engage these students, we connect them to the education system, we give them the skills they want. Third, it's just what does this education look like? A, it looks like teaching for the community. It looks like if kids want to go into trades, teaching them exactly how they can trade, what skills they'll need. We can do that on our side because you don't have to teach them the standardised curriculum. We can adapt it to each student. We can adapt it to each year level. B, it's just like teach us about local problems. And fourthly, just like as Zoe said, the government has like necessary requirements to get into education, right? They're not likely to be like, oh, you got this good qualification from your school. They're likely to be like, can you do this test? Like, there's going to be different ways to like get into university. It's not what your school gives you. You have to meet the baseline standard. Therefore, it's like up to the government to decide if you can get in. And if there's like a school that's like disproportionately failing all these standards that the government has set, the government's likely to be like, you're failing. I'm going to help you. Let's see what you're doing. They're likely to uproot it. Their job is to literally protect people. Secondly, we heard from opposition is that like schools can filter what they teach. Firstly, it's just like it's very unlikely to happen for two reasons. First is because like other teachers, students can just judge and second guess what they're teaching. Like if a teacher's being really racist about Maori people, the students will be like, is that true? Then like other teachers will cross-reference and be like, that's not cool, we shouldn't be teaching that. And it's just like board of trustees don't want to see their school as like really religious, or not really religious, but like really racist. Therefore, the board of trustees hold the teachers accountable if they're teaching really bad things. That's dismantled from the system. Secondly, just like kids will ask questions if you like miss something good. Like say if you miss sex education, most kids probably want to learn about sex education. They're incentivized to ask you questions. They're going to do that. You have to teach it then because the kids want to learn about it. We have that under our side of the house. And also like thirdly is just like most teachers have like the kids' incentive at heart. They know they need like to learn about sex education. They're likely to do that. The third thing we heard from opposition that private schools have like structural advantage. Kids can come out with like this with same qualifications. It makes them all on the same playing field. First is just like what happens on the SCADA score is like I'm unsure why they'll change it because private schools still have like a better advantage. Still have like name recognition, right? Kids from St. Peter's will have like a better chance going to university than kids from Kiddingly High School. That's just how the system is set in place. Second is just like teachers who teach in more schools are like more engaged. They care about their students. They care about teaching them what they want to learn. The second thing we heard from opposition is that like this idea about third world countries. Look, third world countries don't have standardized education. That sort of falls out of today's debate. You can't talk about these third world countries. And secondly, just like spreads propaganda in their state curriculum. That's not really good. We've basically proven that we get more innovation. The education can change for them. They can adapt to the current status quo. Lastly, then on student education. Look, we had minimal responses. I'll quickly respond to what they said on the fact that they care about students who don't succeed, limited access to resources. Firstly, students are incentivized to help kids, give them resources. They're not just going to be like, take this, do your best, fail. Right? They're incentivized to help you pass. It's likely also to like change the definition of passing, right? Instead of passing being like, you just get an excellence, passing is now, can you do this certain skill? Can you like pass this how to be a nice human being test? At the end of the debate, we told you that firstly, teachers are engaged. Secondly, kids are engaged because the teachers are engaged. They really care about what they're learning. They have a deeper connection to it. At the end of this debate, affirm.
Thanks for that speech, and now I'll give you the speech for the
The affirmative team live in a world where the only things that really matter is how fun people find the subjects and how teachers can like teach a niche subject that might get more creative engagement, right? Let's look at the big outcomes in this debate. Small rural schools will crumble when they have to switch all their resources to this new progressive curriculum that does not adapt to the workforce that we have established throughout our capitalist society today. They never engage with why these skills are going to be important to employers, how systems and countries that have shaky education systems are going to adapt. We live in the real world. That's what Hawkes Bay tells you. Right, 3 points of clash in today's debate. Firstly, are we able to see the succession of students? Secondly, who engages students more? And thirdly, a last point, final point of clash on who gets minority issues addressed, right? But firstly, because a lot of my material is going to be based on like outcomes for the most vulnerable stakeholders in this debate, which we believe are people with shaky education systems and people in rural schools, I'm just going to quickly rebut their assertion that like developing countries don't have standardized education. No, like they never provided any reason for this, and we believe that this is like a strangely elitist assertion. Like we see people like doctors and engineers coming out of developed countries because they were the one to break them up, they were the one to excel within that system, and this is why we see like brain drain in countries like Kenya. Okay. Right, on to my first point about who we're going to see students succeed more. They wanted to come up with this push that a ministry is worse because it is like more majorative, right? Firstly, no, we actually do have different standards within units. They wanted to try and say, no, you don't have that, that's too similar. No, right, we actually do have units like mechanics and like wavelength or whatever in physics, right? There are different units within that, and schools can pick that. That's a very real thing under NCEA. But secondly, right, we believe majority is good. Why is this? It provides the same resources for everyone. No school has a particular advantage over another school, which is particularly important in emerging economies like China, where things like the Gaokao is so heavily restricted to how much equity you can have, because we know how competitive that market would be. We want all students to have an equal opportunity. That's why there's such harsh regulations there, right? Because when everyone has access to past papers, to those NCEA thinker videos on YouTube, we have better support from them, right? But what else do we get? We get community support. Your parents probably went through NCEA when we go on for generations. Your friends probably know about it. You get that outside support, which isn't directly linked to your education, but we believe is still incredibly valuable because it gives you that sort of community backing there. What did they also want to say? We're not going to rely on rote memorization and these other like sort of useless learning techniques, right? This point only stands if they can prove that like things like university test scores and things like that are going to change in a certain way. They have not provided an analysis as to why these tests are going to change and why these tests are going to change and how the workforce is going to change, right? What employers look for at the moment, they know if you passed a certain exam at a certain level, right? And they want to, and this is what we're going to bring up, bringing back Ella's material. They do not, a lot of these places aren't going to like know all the progressive workforces. If your employer has to look through hundreds of different like, progressive education systems around the world, they're just going to pick the one with name value. That's when you get all these very established private schools getting like getting more name recognition, and that's why they get more qualifications there, right? And they will try to claim under this right that students are going to succeed more because like they're having more passionate teachers and therefore they're going to have like better curriculums because like one really passionate teacher is going to like send out the curriculum. We're not going to have those thousands of hours that we are going outside of house basically. It's not just engagement, which the curriculum should be addressed by. It should be done on things like passability, things like employability, things that actually prove that students have the capability to push through a subject even if it's boring. Because guess what? In the real world, you're going to learn things that aren't very nice. But what you're going to actually have, what actually sets you apart from everyone else is how you deal with the discipline that you have on yourself, how hard you can work, and how much you can able to memorize that subject on yourself. If you were just doing it on engagement, we believe that point is very minor in today's debate, right? And then they wanted to say, oh no, employers don't actually care about qualifications, they care about the skills, right? Firstly, how are you going to prove you have those skills if you don't have sort of like standardized tests and things like that? They didn't provide a mechanism as to why some subjects will display more of your skills than others. We believe on our side of the house, if you're forced to learn about maybe a more hard subject like level 3 calculus, which is quite universally hard, employers are going to see that. They're going to be like, okay, this person is more aware of what's going on and are going to be like more employable because they have that work ethic, right? But secondly, we believe that like even if we maybe get like less employability, right, we want more people to go into these sort of STEM subjects and the large scale things to get into high tech, high wage and STEM communities, right? That's what emerges economies. That's what gets people out there in the workforce. I'm sorry that you like things like, I don't know, dance and whatever are still important, we concede that, but like we believe that if we are able to make a trade-off, we want the high-tech and ones that will develop economies. Before I go on to my second point, POI.
Do you think creative students who aren't able to memorise to the same extent have an equal opportunity to those who can?
I think it's a privilege to be a creative student, as in you have the fitter facilities that elicit creative things. Not every school has a dance gym, not every school has an art room. Right, what's the second point of clash? Who engages students more? Right, if you did not buy any of that material, let's see how we can win on like the sort of more like stuff about how we actually do increase students more. They want to say firstly, they're going to be bored of what they're learning. We've taught it for 10 years over. Like, we don't want to hear about it anymore, right? Firstly, we believe like the subject itself is not boring. We believe it's the way it is being taught, or the specific ways a teacher can mitigate, enhance that material, right? Maybe you have a science teacher who does experiments with you. You can actually see it visually. We believe the subject of science on its own is not boring, and we believe it's that's just a really bad assertion, right? But even if, right, you want to divide that, some subjects are, maybe more interesting than others, you can say that, students won't know what subjects they find interesting if they aren't, forced to do a certain subject. We're all forced to do maths up to a certain level, right? And some students, surprisingly enough, actually enjoy maths, and they actually, see the sort of value in having and actually connecting with that. That would not happen if, they hear the stigma, oh, maths sucks and it's really hard. They choose not to go into that because people tell them it's hard, and then they just disengage out of that career altogether, right? Then they wanted to try and say under this that they can teach they can teach Te Reo Māori more on their side and have more Indigenous subjects and things like that, because they can choose the curriculum. Firstly, we already have that under our side. We have Te Reo as a subject, and it's also included in social studies such as geography and history, right? But how do we have more of it? We're able to have more of it because we don't restrict you from schools that are more conservative and rural areas. You get to learn about diverse sex ed if you're a LGBTQ plus student at a conservative rural school. These schools are usually, and it's really important to this because they show how that they are usually the ones that isolate children and give them more say, right? Also, okay, quickly, lastly, on this sort of who is going to include more diversity of minorities, they wanted to try and come out and say this board is mostly white. It's usually men. They don't know how to cater to minority voices. But firstly, I just don't believe that our board is just white men, especially in New Zealand. They want to be teaching Māori issues in a way that is respectful. They're held publicly accountable for that. And we have seen, that system evolve over time. We don't have any more racist school journals. But believe that, secondly, that public backlash is, really effective, right? As when you have more racist teachers, especially in New Zealand, when we saw Wellington girls have a scandal with anti-Pacifica things on the wall, that stuff does get addressed, especially in this country, right? They wanted to try and say then schools have an incentive to talk about diverse sex ed and things like that because it gives their students a better chance to succeed, right? Firstly, we believe again these are incredibly these are knowledges that a lot of students won't maybe choose to talk about, and again conservative schools won't do this. And secondly, we have to think on a worldwide scale where many schools would not teach it otherwise because there would be a ban. At the end of this debate, who tells you that people are going to be more employable? Who gives school more remaining? It's Team Hawkes Bay.
So that is thanks again for that speech, and now we move to the revised portion of the debate. So I'd like to welcome back to the leader of the opposition.
Team Hawkes Bay wins this debate when we prove to you that countries with well-established standards protect the vulnerable students and high standards of education that are so important for our society. Three main points of clash that I've identified today: who better supports students, teachers' incentives, and later in life. Moving on to the most important clash, which is who better supports students. Despite what the app have said down the line, that teachers matter most because their engagement affects students' engagement, we see that it doesn't matter whether a teacher is enjoying teaching as long as our students get the quality education that comes with standardisation. The main push that we brought you in this debate is that we will have better resources all around when we have standardised testings and standardised curriculums. We said that past papers online, videos, and things of that nature that are naturally created alongside standardised curriculums are so crucial for students that aren't going to succeed. These students that are failing isn't because they don't like the topic, it's because they don't relate to the one-on-one teaching. We told you that these videos and other resources are so important and they lose us under their side of the house. We also told you how if we introduce And if we introduce this, the private versus public schooling gaps will only increase. Employers don't understand, they'll just look for more curriculums, and they'll only look for more accreditations, and that's only going to be available in private schools. We don't want to increase this divide between the uneducated and the educated, and I brought you a full point on that at first. Secondly, on to teachers' incentives. Now, they told us at first that teachers are disengaged, and that's why they strike. We told you that teachers strike because of lack of resources and lack of pay. We tell you that increasing teachers' workloads by making them create an entirely new curriculum, and yeah, they can keep some NCEA standards, but apparently they really don't want to do that. So, creating an entirely new curriculum is not going to make teachers happier. They want to improve, and that's why they're striking. Isabella gave you a whole split on this. It is not going to make the teachers happier. It is going to, and also the idea that teachers can work together and one passionate teacher can make the change. NCEA took hundreds of workers and decades to form. A few teachers working together with their passions isn't going to create this, and we've told you this from first. We also told you on teachers' incentives about teachers having bias. Now, we do acknowledge that racism bias is huge in schools because we see this huge divide between minority groups and majority students, but we also say that teachers don't love every student and they might love other students more. We told you at Isabella and at first that when we remove national standards and moderations, teachers can get away with bias, and we see this as being an extremely negative thing because what's important about standards is that all students get treated the same in the way that when they go out they're going to have the same standard. This is crucial because it means that some students aren't going to be getting the great grades that are going to get them into higher education when other students deserve it just as much. Thirdly, on later in life. We told you that the main reason for school is to help students succeed later on. It isn't just to give them skills for the now. We told you how a huge range of accreditations is going to confuse employers and increase the divide with public school kids and private school kids. We also told you that we protect students from missing out on key, crucial information because the government and the public push for it. This looks like sex education. The affirming team tried to tell you that this isn't important. We see this is extremely important to getting to our students. We see this is extremely important into getting into Christian schools who have had the same Christian community around them that tells them it's not okay to be gay. We tell them that students missing out on learning this basic math because the teacher is bored of teaching long division isn't going to be the best for our students in the long run. And we also told you that single students don't understand every student's potential career, therefore they're not going to be able to create a curriculum that suits every student. They're going to create a curriculum that suits them. We do not stand for that in this debate. We want students to be able to learn anything. We want to protect the vulnerable students, and we want to protect the high standards of education that are so important. Proud to negate.
Now we hear that speaker for that speech, and now we're here to close the debate for Proposition 5.
Look, in today's debate, we believe that teachers are one of the main stakeholders in this debate, but why? Well, without a good, engaged, passionate teacher, how are you going to teach these kids to be successful? The negating side stands for teachers that are underpaid, overworked, not supported in their own passions that they want to project into their classrooms, whereas we stand for teachers that have a say. They have the opportunity to teach the kids what they think is necessary and have that freedom over their job. We've proved that teachers have a higher engagement on our side of the house, and this is important to see student engagement and better student education. The negating team, has said things like making a whole new curriculum is too much work for teachers. It's too much work for the average overworked teacher. It will make them disengaged. It'll make their curriculum lazy, things like that. But we've responded to this in multiple ways. Firstly, they have a support system available through their community connections that typically teachers do have because there is a community within your workplace. It happens almost everywhere. It'll happen with teachers too. Secondly, teachers finally get this opportunity to make changes. So they'll have that passion and that incentive to push forward and to see this change in their classrooms. They've also said things like teachers in schools with extreme ideas won't have that prevention from the set curriculum to stop these kinds of things from happening. Well, we've pointed out that students quite often have the background knowledge and also the social knowledge of being able to identify whether something is wrong or right. Throughout today's debate, to show that we've showed higher teacher engagement. We've shown things like teachers will be more passionate about what they're doing, they'll be able to teach what they want to teach, and they'll be improving their skills in general. They also know the useful information and skills that kids need for their future, so they're able to provide for those students. They have those personal passions that create a better environment for them to work in. Now, a better performance by teachers will make a flow-on effect to the students' performance. Without passionate, hardworking teachers, you will never see the success from the education system on either side of the house. The NEET team had to prove that students would be disadvantaged if this moot stands, but they have failed to recognise that teachers are necessary for their students' development. Now, moving on to which side actually allows success for the students. Look, they've said things like minorities don't get the resources that they need. We say that we believe that passionate teachers who want better outcomes for those minorities will be able to do more. They can cater to these students through cultural requirements and ensure they can engage. They've said things that this doesn't pay for jobs. It doesn't prepare people for jobs. I'd like to point out that firstly, employers don't go through everything that you've done and go, oh, I want to read this history assessment they wrote in year 11. They don't do that. They see what you've done. You go, that looks about right. These niche subjects that we are wanting to push on our side are there to diversify students and their skill level and being able to make them more applicable to employers and more beneficial for the community. We'd like to point out that on the negating side, they want this high-tech, good job employers. They want people to be able to enter those systems. But this argument doesn't seem particularly important when so many kids are dropping out of schools. So many kids aren't even making it through secondary school, let alone tertiary education, and that's what we want to fix. You won't see that kind of benefit if we just keep the same old, same old. That clearly isn't working. We've offered a great alternative for these students to see the success out of high school. We also recognise that these high-tech, high-qualified jobs are not the only ones that students need to become successful with in life. We offer so many more pathways for students to enter into the workforce, and we offer them to be able to have a deeper, diverse understanding because of these engaged teachers that are passionate and can support them in every way that they can. That is why we have won today's debate. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for that debate. I'd like to invite you across the floor, shake hands, and if you could just stay outside while I do it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.